Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. I want this video to be long, and I want it to get down into the weeds and just air out and let me get as technical as I want to. So I'm going to mention the sponsor right now up front, which is different, I know, but I want to say thank you to 23andMe for sponsoring this episode of Smarter Every Day. I've been to their lab too. It's a really cool place. So I'll tell you more about their at-home genetic test service later in the episode, but for now, let's talk about haptic gloves. In the last episode of Smarter Every Day, you got to see me interacting with a haptic glove, and it changed my mind about VR, and here's the deal. When you're a startup company, it's a double-edged sword, right? You want people to know that you're doing these great, wonderful things so you can get investors and stuff like that, but conversely, you don't want them to know the secret sauce because you got to maintain your competitive edge, right? So the fun thing about this is when I got down to talking to the engineers at like the fundamental like haptic pixel level of how this thing works, you can see their eyes darting around the room. Like they freak out. The reason they freak out is because they haven't been permitted to talk about how this glove works in forever, apparently. And then this dude walks in with a camera and sticks a camera in his face and asks them very, very technical questions. It's really fun to see their reaction. But I was able to sign some paperwork and we were able to work out a deal so that I could take you right up to the edge of proprietary information, but not cross that line so that they can still maintain their edge. So after I met the founder, Jake, and the co-founder, Bob, they turned me over to the head of engineering ops, Leif, to ask questions. In the last video, we went through what the experience was like. So this time I just wanted to focus on how everything works. I decided to just go for it and ask Keenan what kind of actuators they use to simulate touch. So I'm gonna wear a glove under the glove.
Correct, it's just for sanitary purposes.
I'm really excited right now. So a question I have is if I touch on my hand right here and I'm supposed to feel the presence of something there, in order to have an actuator in that location, you have to have a ton of different valves, for example, if you're using pneumatics, or linear actuators if you're using electromechanical actuators. So how do you get around that problem?
We describe them as like haptic pixels, and each pixel would be its own pneumatic actuator, and they are arrayed over your hand.
Okay, I'm ready to try.
Okay.
Yeah. How many of these exist?
I don't think I can share that.
Okay.
Cool. So we'll just pull this down, and I'll help you get these on.
Oh, so you're aligning it to my finger. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Well, what are these?
So we
They don't want to talk about anything.
Okay, so we developed a custom motion tracking solution that uses both optical and magnetic tracking to get really accurate positions of each one of your fingertips.
Yes.
And then we do some crazy stuff in the software, and using all that information, we can figure out where all your fingers are in space.
Yes, and what I learned from my class I'm taking at school is there's a lot of coordinate transformations happening in my hand right now, right? Are they happening in my hand, or are they happening off my hand in the processor?
They're happening in the computer.
Okay. I know the math, and it's awesome. All right, let's do it. After running the simulation, I learned one of the most important concepts. It's called the 2-point threshold. You've had to have done a study on this. You've figured out the specific bladder density that you need in order to trick the brain, knowing that it's not going to go photorealistic and feel like complete immersion. Is that true?
Yeah, there's actually a medically known metric called the 2-point threshold, which is basically if you take two pencils and poke somebody on the skin, how close together do those get before they can't tell that it's two separate points?
I keep calling them bladders. What's the actual word?
We call them tactors.
So the spatial resolution of the tactors just has to be inside of the 2-point resolution of the human hand.
It's a little more complicated than that. I mean, the 2-point threshold is one of very many aspects of touch, and I'm not the most qualified person to talk to you about that. And we do have a couple folks here who could talk for a very long time about it.
So I'm Destin.
Hey, I'm Adam.
Adam. So how do you develop software for something that's never been done like this before? Like, do you create your own language for the glove?
So the way the software works is it takes information from the physics engine, and then we have to figure out how to render that. And you know it's pneumatic. We have to figure out how to open and close valves in the right order and all that sort of thing. So the software does that.
So you have 150 something valves or whatever it is you have to control, and you have to control it almost real time. You know your latency, don't you? Yeah. So, and you're not going to tell me that, I'm assuming.
I'm not going to talk about that.
So you have to. It has to be quick enough where a human can think that they're actually engaged with it. So there is a threshold there.
There is a threshold, and they've done studies on it. They found that anything longer than a quarter a second is too long. You lose the temporal connection between the things. But if you get below like half that, then
You're fine?
Yeah, your brain doesn't know.
They're discussing about whether or not I get to see a tactor. I really want to see a tactor. Who do I talk to see a tactor? Do you think Leif?
Leif's called.
Leif will. Well, let me see. Okay.
We're looking at the website.
But if it's on the website,
They're looking at the
Make sure
website.
on the website, because that's one of the rules we were given. If it's on the website, then we can show it to you.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Have you ever met someone that you just click with? You're on the same wavelength instantly? This is Mark. The other engineers call him Mr. Glove. This is the guy that knows all the things. The fun part about this conversation is if you watch Mark's eyes, it's clear that he just wants to geek out, but he can't because someone set up this proprietary borderline that he can't cross. Anyway, this is one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had in a really long time. That's Mark. All right. So this is it, huh?
Yeah, and they're really pretty simple. As you said, they're pneumatic. As you guessed, they're a bladder.
So right here, I'm looking at the end. So I'm seeing, how many is that? 12? What do you call, so this is a tactor. So what are these individual dots called?
We actually call the individual dots tactors, and the whole thing is a panel. So we group a bunch of tactors together on a panel. It makes it easier to route air to them, makes it easier to support them, and we can control each of them individually.
Look, I know we're in the weeds here, but Mark's about to describe a bunch of neat little things about your hands. So if you'll check out your hands and do these little activities as he's describing them, you'll understand things that you've never even thought about before, like the squish of your skin as you touch a hard object. If you will use your hands to do them as he's talking, you will understand the sense of touch on a much greater level. So this is the spot where the research stuff that you have to get into kind of move away from the traditional electrical, mechanical engineering and kind of moves into how the brain works.
It moves into ergonomics, it moves into human factors, and it moves into psychometrics. So,
Psychometrics, I don't even know what that means.
it's how people process things, right? It's how your brain works for sensation. I don't know if you've ever seen something called the sensory homunculus. It's a picture of a person scaled relative to how many nerve endings they have in different parts of their bodies.
It's basically a surface density of your tactile receptors. Is that a good way to say it?
That's a very good way of saying it. And so, these panels, we think a lot about the huge hands part of that. They're incredibly sensitive. And so figuring out how to design a piece of equipment that is high fidelity and capable enough of tricking those sense organs is a lot of what our challenge is.
Okay, so you're inflating this particular tactor here, right?
Right.
It's like a balloon, right? Mm-hmm. If I were to touch this table with my hand right now, okay? Touch the table. So it's not a step function. It's a, it's a curve. But it's not linear either.
Right.
Because as you press in on something, there's thickness to my skin, and so it starts as a line, and then it ramps up, and then it gets harder and harder and harder.
Absolutely.
Right? Is an exponential curve? Do you know what that curve is? You don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell me what it is, but
That's right. You're hitting on a great question, which is what that approach and that curve of displacement looks like. Remembering that your fingers are sense organs, one of the ways they sense is by stretching, right? They are deformed and you actually feel that deformation. So there's what is your skin doing, which is it actually gets stiffer as you push on it harder and harder, and that's part of why we have such good
dexterity.
Right. The other part of it is what's the material you're pushing into. In some cases, if that material's soft, well, that's going to deform as well, so you're going to have a slightly different approach. Yeah.
Like we're sacks of watery meat stuff. And so the relative difference between the hardness of the object you're touching is going to affect the attack time. Is that, I don't know what term you use, but I would say attack time of
rise
the
time, sure.
rise time. This is all making sense.
There's also little things like how well does your glove fit?
That's why when I put the glove on, it felt like there was, you know, a physical thimble that goes on the end of my finger, is because you wanted a tactor to be aligned with my finger, just like that, right? Is that why? It's because you have to have something to react against.
Correct.
Is that why you did that?
Yep. When you're touching something, it's not just the feedback you feel on your skin, but also the feedback you feel in your joints, your tendons, as you push against it. So we want to make sure to combine both of those.
You're absolutely right, and I've never thought about that at all. If I grab something, if I grab this and I squeeze it, I can tell how big it is because of where my tendons are, and I can tell how hard it is because of how hard I'm squeezing it, and it's deflecting my skin between my bones, and all that goes into, it rolls up into one like transfer function to give you the answer of what object is in your hand.
Right, and that's where things get complicated.
Your world revolves around boundary conditions, doesn't it? Like mathematical boundary conditions.
Pretty much, yeah. Boundary conditions and contact mechanics.
So what is this right here, this tape that I'm seeing? It looks like a tape measure that's pulling back.
That's the force feedback system. That's what stops your hand from closing when you grab an
It's a
object
boundary
beyond.
condition.
Yes.
It's a boundary condition. So instead of pushing on this side of the hand, you're actually pulling from the other side of the hand, and that's what stops the hand from moving.
Correct.
And so you have to have some kind of a braking mechanism back here. So can you crush things? Like if you have something virtually, can you set a resistance? Like if I were to touch something hard versus something soft, can you vary that force feedback?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. These guys are like, everything's proprietary. Just wear the glove, stupid boy.
That one was, it's a complicated answer.
Yeah.
That was a complicated answer?
That one's really complicated.
So something that matters here is the entire volume. There's a time it takes to do that compression.
Right.
So there's a lag associated with, it's basically the elasticity of the volume, right? What's the word?
Well, there's a question of how fast you can push air through to this guy, and that gives you how fast you can run that tactor.
So it's this balance between having enough pressure to activate the system in a fast time. Granted, you're going through a small tube, so the effusion rate of the gas is important. So you've got all that figured out. And there's mechanical lag associated with the effusion rate, or the head pressure is what it's called.
Yeah, with the velocity of the fluid.
The feedback diagram or the block diagram of how perfecting this looks, it's going to look like a plus and a minus between you two guys, right?
And include some electrical engineers in there for good measure.
Nobody cares about electrical engineers, let's be honest. Just pretend I didn't say that. I'm with Jeffrey, an electrical engineer. So Jeffrey, I know how the tactors work. Or at least I've seen them. I think I figured it out.
Yeah, you felt them?
I felt them, right.
I make sure we have good information about where the fingertips and the other parts of the hand are so that we can turn on tactors at the right times to the right pressures.
Dude, that's awesome. I mean, those valves that you're controlling, can you talk about that at all?
I can't talk about the type of valve we use, but the timing and the hydraulics problem that you mentioned are things we work on pretty frequently. It's important to get them inflated the right amounts at the right times. We kind of get a pass on how accurate that is just because of how slow sensation is.
Right.
You know, people's perception of touch especially is not nearly as fast as things like vision or sound.
Especially thermally. Even this, I'm assuming that's something you guys are going to work on.
Particularly slow.
Ed was telling me about the thermal component to this. Both of these objects are 73 degrees, but that metal feels way colder.
Yeah, so when you're touching these objects, you're not just feeling the temperature of the objects, but you're feeling the heat transfer between them and your hand. And that's because the reason the metal feels colder is because it has a higher thermal conductivity than the wood does.
So it's like sapping more heat out of your hand.
That's exactly right, yeah.
You're going to model different types of objects by making more water flow or flow at a different temperature to pull more heat out of your fingers. That's basically what you're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's important that we don't just flow water at the right temperature, but we flow it at the temperature that it makes you think you're touching the real objects with different thermal conductivities.
Adam showed me another demonstrator where a dragon flies across the room, breathes fire on my hand, which I can feel both thermally and like touch, and then it breathes ice on my hand, which felt cold. Now, what's clear to me is they've got to be using fluid at this point, because that's the only way you can remove that much heat. So I think there's a tactor for touch and a pad for thermal, but I think they're separated within the 2-point threshold. They wouldn't tell me. I wasn't permitted to look. But one thing that was really interesting, if you switch from hot to cold, it happened really fast. So they have to dump the hot from the lines and get cold in there fast. So there's a lot going on here, and I want to know mechanically how they do this. This is a heat exchange problem. This was number 2?
This is number 2. You tried number 3. So.
Awesome. So this is second generation. Okay, so it's just one hand stationary in location. Oh, God, that makes so much sense. If I were to develop this, I would have started at moving the hand in space and then add the haptics to that, but instead you started with the haptics.
So we knew that people could do motion capture. That's been done before. So we wanted to start with the thing that hadn't been done before.
Clever.
Keep your thumb beside your hand as you go in.
How are you doing that? I would expect that that's fluid in there, or that's actually a solid that I'm touching. You're not allowed to tell me?
I'm looking at Leif right now just to see.
Golly, man.
It's hot and cold fluid.
It's hot and cold fluid, gotcha. Oh, and it's a chunk of snow. It's a snowball.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a dragon. Oh, it's gonna burn my hand.
I don't think it likes being poked.
Oh, it shouldn't. That's awesome. Okay, that's good. So you guys like Game of Thrones? So it's a combination of the tactors firing and temperature control. So you haven't implemented temperature control into...
Not in the glove. The glove does not have thermal.
Is that a goal?
I don't think I could talk about that.
That's awesome. So what we've learned is it's how far the tactors are fired, the rate at which they are fired, so the rise time. The timing is important. Not just the rise time, but the impact timing is important. The heat transfer with fluid, which is something obviously they don't want to talk about. Obviously they're working on it. That's amazing. All that stuff actually tricks your brain. It does a really good job of tricking your brain, which I did not expect. And I did not like VR up to this point. Seriously, that's pretty cool. We're living in the future. Haptic gloves, you're touching stuff in virtual reality. I'm about to tell you about the sponsor, which is 23andMe, 23 pairs of human chromosomes, where the name comes from. If you don't know about 23andMe, the way it works is you go to 23andme.com/smarter. I'd appreciate it if you use that link. You get this vial, you spit in it, and you send it off. You can do one of 2 kits. You can do the health and the ancestry kit, or just the ancestry kit. But if you have any questions about where this goes, I did a whole video at their lab. The cool thing about this, though, you get this report online. You can learn stuff about your body, about your family. It's amazing. But here's the deal. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, just recently approved 23andMe's ability to release new genetic marker information. And I don't want to go into the specifics of what that is, but it's stuff you care about. This is new, like this is future stuff, okay? So go to 23andme.com/smarter and at least read about the new information that 23andMe can release to you because the FDA allowed it. It's cool stuff. So I would appreciate it if you would participate in the future with me and go to 23andme.com/smarter. You're smart people. You know how this works. That helps Smarter every day. I hope you love this because we're stinking in the future, like right now. And it reminds me of when I was a kid and used to watch Beyond 2000 with my dad. I feel like I'm getting to make that show now, which is cool. Anyway, please consider going to 23andme.com/smarter. That supports Smarter every day. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video. If not, that's no big deal. Thanks for coming along on the ride with me. Anyway, I'm Destin. You're getting smarter every day. Have a good one. Bye. So I feel like I sufficiently understand at least a little bit of the system. So thank you very much. It's Mark, right?
Yeah.
So I have found the wizard for the glove. It's Mark.